people dying because lack of data in the year 2024. Data that could be shared, that could be available for the benefit of the patient is not available. Every day we see the consequences of that.
Till Winkler, professor, researcher, educator, and speaker.
Doctors and physicians in the field, they want these apps that patients use to be safe, and they want them to have a proven medical outcome. So many of these apps, they use cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches and other things, especially in mental health. And so the question is this really effective, right? So should I suggest my patients to use that? Should I prescribe that? Well, I need to be certain that this actually has a clinically proven effect. And in order to prove such effect, we cannot just rely on the free market. We need some regulatory framework.
I think one of the reasons why Denmark has been a little bit reluctant, especially some of the insurance companies, of bringing in a lot of these, AI decision-making screening tools is because, the accuracy rate has to be like super high. We're talking like 99.99%, because if you're using something every day and you have a large population, then even, 1% of that population that gets an inaccurate result, they're going to call. And that's just a probability chance that it's, inaccurate. It says you have something, but you don't.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by Noble Blocks.
So, Till, thank you so much for joining us on Bonded by Science. I've been looking forward to this, for a little while now, ever since you agreed to hear me out to see what we were launching. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been some time since we last talked, so looking forward to this.
If I do recall correctly, the last time we spoke was when I joined a webinar that you invited me to.
That one, yeah.
That was a while ago. Yes, that was really a long time ago. A few years, perhaps.
Now it's a revenge. That's when I was still back at CBS at Copenhagen Business School, and we formed this digital health theme and invited some speakers. One of them were you. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, and I think at that time I was still at Aalborg University, very much involved in, working on our digital health projects. So we had a lot of, our research had a huge overlap at that point. And I remember joining the webinar and being, really... I was just so happy to be in a room, if you will, with other people that had the same passion and the same interest, but also were familiar with the barriers that are present today for research that is focusing on digital health, but also research that is trying to commercialize applications within digital health for the public good. So I guess like my journey into digital health came because I was interested in pain science, and then we found a way to map that onto a digital avatar. So that was my sort of gateway into digital health. But how was your entry into this as a field? Because you've based, the first part of your career, from what I understand, on digital health and all the nuances surrounding digital health.
Yeah, well, so I'm a business informatics student by training, you would say. In German, it's called Wirtschaftsinformatik. That's also what I did my PhD in. So as a matter of fact, my PhD at Humboldt University in Berlin was not in the field of healthcare yet. But I remember after completing the PhD, my second academic supervisor, Carol Brown, she was back then a distinguished professor at Hoboken University. She invited me to come over to the States and to do some field research in digital health because, well, back then, the Obama administration had launched the High-Tech Act, and a lot of things were happening in the US. And she was like, Till, come over here. And there's a lot of data sharing taking place, and they started what was called a health information exchange. So I went over as a postdoc, and we did some field work. And that was my sort of entry point academically into the field of digital health. But then later I realized, okay, actually, I had sort of a past in healthcare. So when I completed high school, I served my alternative civilian service. Back then, Germany still had a military service that young men had to complete, and alternatively could do the alternative civilian service. And I chose to work for the Red Cross, and as a matter of fact, benefited from the education to become an EMT, an emergency medical technician, and for about a year was part of the team that was going on ambulances and helping both emergency but also non-emergency cases. And so back then, that was my first confrontation with the health system in Germany.
Right. And how does your, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but how does your impression of the healthcare system in Germany hold today? Like you've lived and worked in Denmark for many years, and I know you're cultured and you've traveled. Well, you've been to the States, that's one. And they have a very different healthcare setup than Denmark, which I know you're familiar with, and then also in Germany now. So you have been exposed not just as an academic, but as an individual, a person that is reliant on the healthcare. What are your impressions?
Yeah, of course, if you live some time abroad and then come back to your home country, you get a sort of different perspective on the system and how things are provided in the public sector, for example, how the health system works. And we know that the Scandinavian countries are quite advanced in terms of how technology is used, how data is shared in the health system. So honestly, when I came back to Germany, that was 2017 in terms of my place of residence, and 2021 in terms of my startup at the University of Hagen. When I came back to Germany, it felt a bit like a time travel, right? But a travel back in time. So to give you one example, in Germany, as a paramedic, as an emergency medical technician, right, when you come to a patient, you probably not get more than the information about their name and maybe some brief code of what's been announced on the emergency hotline, and then you get there and you don't know what is the state of that person, what's the prior medical history, what are any allergies, what medication is this person taking, right? And that's how it was 25 years ago when I worked in that profession, and that's still how it works today, right? So I think in Germany we have lagged behind quite a bit when it comes to using data, available data about patients. And some colleagues in the medical profession, they talk about people dying because lack of data, people dying for data protection reasons. That's, of course, a very drastic way to express it.
But maybe a way for it to get attention.
Yeah, it's a way to get attention. And that's the problem we're facing, right? So in the year 2024, data that could be shared, that could be available for the benefit of the patient is not available. And every day we see the consequences of that.
Well, why do you suppose that Germany is sort of like really trying hard to catch up? So like if you can, like relatively speaking, if you compare it to countries like Norway and Denmark, which are very, very digital when it comes to their health and have been used as, testing grounds for a lot of applications that have come to market. And then I know the US, I mean, I'm less familiar with the US, but I do know that there's a lot of innovation happening in the US. So why do you suppose that Germany has found itself in this situation? Because my impression, a Canadian, right, coming over to Europe, like Germany has always been really well known for being like an industrial leader. So how could that be? It seems so ironic.
Yeah, well, I don't want to play the big pessimist here, but in some regard, Germany's reputation is sometimes better than what it looks like from the inside. So there's a funny anecdote. I used to, I once gave a talk at a PhD course in Hong Kong. So I asked the students there, who do you think has the better healthcare system and who's more advanced in terms of healthcare digitalization, the Scandinavian countries like Denmark or Germany? And everybody voted for Germany, right? And they raised their hands. So made in Germany is still a good brand, and of course abroad, there's a good image that Germany has cultivated, and that's fine. But I don't want to bash only Germany here. I mean, it's a larger country with a federal structure, right? So in terms of structure, there's actually a lot of parallels to the United States, and also to the way how the healthcare system is organized. There are some parallels to the German Bismarck type of system and the US system with their multi-payer structures. Don't want to go into detail with that, but I mean, the sheer size of the country is certainly a factor that increases complexity. And then when you have a federal structure with different regions, or Bundesländer, as we call them in Germany, that all have a say, it leads to some sort of fragmentation, right? So that's one factor. Denmark, as we know, a few decades ago, had some structural reforms. They also had this sort of more fragmented structure and centralized quite a few things, and went down to 5 regions. So Germany is larger, and one Bundesland is as large as a whole Scandinavian country. So that's one fact. The other thing certainly is culture. I mean, culture is a big factor when it comes to digitalization of public infrastructures, digitalization of administrative processes. Let's not forget, in the past century, Germany has had at least 2 regimes that were basically spying on their citizen, right? So the trust into government, or let's put it differently, the notion that the government or some authority there could be in possession of data as sensitive as your health data is not viewed only positively by a great number of people. So we've had this specific culture, while the Scandinavian countries, they are founded on this Samfunds society, right? That everybody is in one big team. They have this Viking culture, partly, right? That only together we can achieve bigger things. So there's historically a much greater tradition of equality and collectiveness, while Germany and US maybe share this more values of greater individualism, greater freedom of the individual, and less, let's say, shared structures. So those are some of the factors that I think lead to a large country like Germany being a little less advanced than their Nordic neighbors in terms of public sector digitalization.
Okay, so just to make sure I understood correctly, so the first part was like a matter of scale. So there's just a lot of people. It's a big country. And then because of that scale, you also would have fragmentation. So different, and in that fragmentation, you also will have different opinions and different levels of trust in the government for, producing or, building infrastructure that could support digital health and innovation. So are those the three main drivers, you suppose, that are coming down to? I mean, I'm sure there are many more, but those are the ones that you have experienced as being the 3?
Yeah, well, that's at least my sort of out-of-the-box answer when people ask me, what are the underlying reasons why a large country like Germany that has such a good reputation of being innovative and providing leading products on the world market is falling behind in many of the rankings in public sector digitalization. So yeah, structural factors, cultural factors, and I would say also governance, right? So the way the healthcare system is organized in Germany is different than how it's organized in the Scandinavian countries. So in Germany, the underlying principle is basically the principle of self-governance. So that means that the payers and the healthcare providers, they figure out a lot of things by themselves. For example, the pricing of medical treatments, and also the question of reimbursement. So the government is not strongly interfering with that. They create a framework in which the self-governance can take place. But historically, it's been very much self-governed. And so when it comes to technology, somebody needs to make decisions because we have network effects, right? Infrastructure technologies like health information infrastructure, they only make sense when a lot of people are participating and a lot of people are using them. Providers have access and patients share their data. And that needs some sort of centralized authority. And that becomes difficult in a system where there's different parties and different stakeholders on different levels. So governance is an issue.
Yeah, and you guys, you had a recent publication that addressed some of these nuances, right? So the publication mapped out people's impressions of private company versus government, develops a health app. Who are you going to trust with your health data? And you explored this as I know I'm generalizing a little bit here, but you explored that as a question. What did you find out in that study?
Yeah, exactly. That was actually a precise summary of the key idea of the paper. So it just came out recently in Business and Information Systems Engineering, BISA journal. We were curious about the question, how does the governance, meaning the ownership of a provider of a health application, influence consumers' trust in that health application or health app, right? And the background is that we know that the market of health apps is growing. It's actually growing exponentially. All kinds of apps become available, from lifestyle apps and well-being apps to more regulated apps like digital therapeutics, which actually have evidence-based effects on health. And some regulatory systems, like the German system, which is, I like to point out, is one of the advanced pieces in German healthcare digitalization. Some healthcare systems have provided pathways on how to integrate such apps into the system and get patients reimbursed when they get these apps prescribed. So doctors can actually prescribe apps now in Germany, also in France and Belgium. In England, we see similar developments. So we became interested in the question, who is then the more trusted provider of a health app? Is it a public party like a health authority or a public insurance, or is it more these startups or maybe big tech companies, given that historically in some countries we have this, let's say, distrust towards government and towards public providers.
But you found that people generally didn't trust their government, or did you find the opposite? Just jog my memory here. So that because I remember there was something that was I was a bit surprised when I read the findings.
Yeah, so we created a prototype app that looked very similar to a personal health records app, as it's now becoming more widely available in the German market. And we decided to focus on the market of Germany just to have a more homogeneous sample or a population that we could generalize to. And we asked the participants of our experiments to rate their trust and also to their usage intentions towards this prototype app that we showed them. Actually, we told them that this was an app under development. And the only thing we modified was the identity of the provider of that app. So to some of the participants, to half of them, we said this is a public provider. So this is your public insurance, or it's a health authority. So we put a logo of the German Ministry of Healthcare, or we put a logo of the public insurance company. And the other half of participants, we told them this is an app from a startup company or an app from a big tech company like Siemens Healthineers, for example. And luckily, or on the positive side, our results showed that generally the participants of the experiment tend to trust significantly more the public providers. So that kind of like rejected the argument that there's a certain distrust into government. Luckily, in Germany, people still have faith in their government. But we also asked them to rate on the ability of this provider to provide advanced digital health solutions. And here it turned out that the ability or the perceived capability of the specifically the health authority, so the public provider, was rated much lower than the one of the private providers. So we thought that was interesting, and that was actually unexpected. So we called this a trustability paradox, right? Apparently, consumers trust the public providers more to provide health infrastructures and health solutions to them, but at the same time, they don't believe that these providers are actually able to drive healthcare digitalization, while the less trusted party are perceived as being more able. So I think that's an interesting paradox, also a complex paradox that, will need to be resolved not only by future research, but actually by practice.
Yeah, it is a bit, it's you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, I guess you could say, right? So you have the trust on one side, but the capabilities low. I suppose the government would just need to step up and do a good job, right? That's the only way to show that can actually happen.
Yeah, and that was actually part of our explanation, to say that, look, historically, Germany has had a history of a rather slow progress in healthcare digitalization. Right, there was a German health card to be in place by 2006, and then eventually it came somewhere between 2011 or 2012, but only with administrative functionality. While Denmark has had national health records, I think, since 1978, right? So, I mean, other countries, they have this track record, and that makes it more understandable why people would trust in the government also to provide sophisticated healthcare solutions. We focused on the German market here, and given the slow progress in the past and the different issues in the history, it's maybe no surprise that there's this impression. But maybe we should end on a more positive note. I'm coming across here like the big German basher and pessimist. Right? I mean, Germany has had now a new government and also a new minister of health, and I think there's a lot of laws underway, and a lot of things are about to change. I think we also see a big momentum. So this whole digital health has become more than just a research topic. I think it's become a community. I think it's become sort of a movement. You see influencers on social media pushing these issues forward. You see like medical doctors and people in health professions who take on leading roles and try to, influence the others that, you have to make this leap, and you have to, be optimistic and fight for it. So I think a lot of things are moving, and that's a really exciting times to be in, actually.
Yeah, and I suppose you could also highlight that, once things do start moving, Germany would have a lot of information and a lot of experience that it can draw on from the learnings from the other countries. So sometimes being first is not always the best. You can be second and be better. So I suppose that would be another positive outlook on like if you start to pick up speed now. And I suppose the most crucial aspect is that you do begin to pick up speed because, as you mentioned in the very beginning of our talk, data has, data influences, the death rate or mortality depending on, the reasons. And there is a lot of, tech that has come about.
Learning from each other, sorry if I interrupt, but learning from each other is actually a really good theme. I think we would do well in looking a bit more across the borders and see what works in other countries and what works not. I think in parts this is happening. For example, I mentioned the digital therapeutic regulation in different European countries. This is something where Germany, with the 2019 law, actually took a front-runner position, and other countries have looked at us. And actually, pharmaceutical companies in Denmark would ask me, "Look, Till, what's your outlook on the German market? And what can we do there? What can we learn from that?" So there's a lot of learning from each other, right? On the other hand, in Germany, we would do well in looking a bit more at our Scandinavian neighbors. How have they organized health information exchange? We would, I think, do well in looking a bit more across the pond to the US and see, okay, how does a huge federal country, I mean, a country of different states, still organize healthcare and make it happen that data flows across different healthcare providers that otherwise compete for market with each other, right? So how does this work in a pluralistic and partly privatized system?
Have you considered what happens to countries, and like this is not just Germany, but it could even still be Denmark down the line, like we don't know. But if they don't keep the momentum, or if they don't pick up speed, private companies will step up. We already see like big companies like Apple and Google, and who knows, maybe Amazon will enter into that scenario as well. And they have they have the marketing skills, they have the resources. So they're going to start saying like, well, if the government's not going to do anything, and they know that the people they want something. They people want to live longer. They want to find ways to lose weight. They want to, eat better. They want more information that will, improve their lifestyle. What do you see as the possible scenario here if the governments don't pick up speed? And I'm not just referring to Germany. I think there's a lot of countries that are struggling to get into digital health. What is the biggest risk do you foresee?
Well, it's an interesting point you're making. Of course, the big tech companies, I mean, Apple with the Apple Watch and Google with Fitbit and so on, they're already there in the consumer market with offering solutions for healthcare and for well-being. More and more data becomes available. People like to, not all of them, but some of us like to keep track of our vital parameters and use these solutions to improve our health and our well-being. So they are already there. I think the challenge is how we integrate those consumerized solutions with the healthcare system. And again, I mentioned these very forward-looking medical doctors who, would just ask their patients, well, show me your app, show me what you got, right? And no sophisticated integration needed with my local information system. Let's just share screens and see what we have here. But I think that's the minority because there's no incentive structure for that. There's no reimbursement. So, but these consumerized solutions are out there. They're creating more and more data. These large companies, they are totally capable of storing that, and the machine learning and the algorithm behind that gets better and better to give some sophisticated advice.
I'm thinking like skincare. So like you see apps that are coming to market now that can help you diagnose if something looks cancerous or not. It can even be infections. It can be sort of a collage of symptoms that you sort of enter into an application to figure out, why you don't feel so well. And there's also things with your eyes. There's a lot of information that can be captured just from looking at your eyes.
Yeah. Physiotherapy, yes, you can use.
And then, of course, then there's like, I'm having trouble sitting or my back hurts. There's a lot of physiotherapy-related apps, especially within pain. This is something that I know.
And mental health, of course.
So I see that, people are going to start using it. And when they do use it, if they get concerned or they get worried, and then they reach out to their, healthcare provider, their first line, and then that just starts to flood the system, which I think one of the reasons why Denmark has been a little bit reluctant, especially some of the insurance companies, of bringing in a lot of these, AI decision-making screening tools is because, the accuracy rate has to be like super high. We're talking like 99.99%, because if you're using something every day and you have a large population, then even, 1% of that population that gets an inaccurate result, they're going to call. And that's just a probability chance that it's, inaccurate. It says you have something, but you don't. So how do you, like, we mentioned, Fitbit and stuff for people, keeping, that's more of a lifestyle. But what about like the health apps? Like, do you see that if the government doesn't start producing, the population is growing, the economies around hospitals and healthcare are getting more tight, and we can like dive into why that is, because I have a whole whack of questions there. But if they don't start producing their own apps, or they don't start leading them, then would that mean that we won't just have private apps, but we'll also have like private hospitals and private, we're going to go very private. And then you're going to get this divide, the digital divide, which is actually going to be a wealth divide, so to speak. Have you engaged in conversations like this, or have I just put too much out there at once? I don't know if you can keep track of
well, we
where
can
I'm
engage
heading.
in a conversation on this right now. So I think doctors and physicians in the field, they want these apps that patients use to be safe, and they want them to have a proven medical outcome. So these apps are not only about diagnosing and using machine learning on whether a mole is benign or not, right? They want, many of these apps, they use cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches and other things, especially in mental health. And so the question is this really effective, right? So should I suggest my patients to use that? Should I prescribe that? Well, I need to be certain that this actually has a clinically proven effect. And in order to prove such effect, we cannot just rely on the free market. We need some regulatory framework. And Germany has created this pathway. Other countries have followed. And I think that's the only way to do it, because you asked me what happens if governments don't create these frameworks. Well, then we'll end up with a plethora of tools and toys, some of which might be somewhat effective, some of which might be less effective, but there will be a little orientation for doctors. And this will probably lead to doctors not adopting them. And talking about this integration, which I demanded earlier, right, that we need to integrate the consumerized health solutions with the health system that we have already. This integration will probably not take place. I also wonder if there's a business case for big tech to engage in providing these health infrastructures. We all remember famously Google Health around the 2010s, 2015, right, was about to enter the personal health record market and famously pulled back because they just found out, A, we don't have the brand for that, and B, there's way too much pushback from the regulatory side. Now they're making new products and entering that field again, but with a much more cautious approach. So the health system is a minefield also for big tech, and they will probably only stick to those areas which are the consumerized part. I mean, let's not forget also medical device regulation. Right, you have the different classes, and the bigger the risk and the impact on your health, the higher the risk class. And getting apps certified is a major effort. So there's a lot of barriers for big tech or for commercial companies to go into that field.
Yeah, actually, you raise a really good point that I didn't quite consider when I was asking you those questions, and that is essentially like maybe it's just not attractive enough because to some of the larger players, because it is, like you said, a landmine. And just when you look at what needs to be done in order to verify that something is working, when the 99.9%, there's a lot of testing that has to go on. And where does that testing get done and who does it? And typically, I would say it's being run, hopefully, objectively in some sort of research organization, many of which happen to be university-led studies. So, yeah, what is your opinion on, is there enough funds in available to even run these studies? Is it your impression that he talks about a lot of apps coming to the market? Are they, people working out in their garages that are developing them? Because I know that there are some, at least in the pain field, where they're not, having the expertise. So how is your experience there? Or didn't you guys do a study that looked at where the apps were being developed and the assessment of that? Or am I mistaken? There was something I thought that I read in your research along those lines.
Right. So you asked me earlier, of whether these apps are better provided by private providers or by public providers. And yeah, well, as a half economist, I'm convinced that the innovation is better placed in the private sector, right? So we need some sort of regulatory framework, but also we need those startups working on these innovative health solutions. From my experience, we've looked a bit at the digital therapeutics providers. In Germany, they're called DiGAs, digitale Gesundheitsanwendungen. That's the German term for digital therapeutic. So most of these companies are small to mid-sized startups. So when this wave started, they were pretty much on their own. And actually, I was wondering, why would not large pharmaceutical companies go into that sector? But they waited quite a bit. But now, if you look at the recent reports, you see that I think 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of them have a pharmaceutical company as their backer. So providing resources, providing financial resources, which gives them a bit more leverage to further their solutions. And this leverage is needed because running these clinical trial studies and showing the effectiveness and providing the evidence that the app or the user of the app and the adherence to the app provides a positive clinical outcome. Those studies are very effortful, they are expensive, they are hard to provide. That's why the regulator in the German fast track model said, okay, you can bring an app to the market in the first year. You don't need to have to prove the clinical evidence. You have 1 year to prove that. And afterwards, we will decide whether we keep it in the catalog or we will drop out. Now, one part of your question was on the role of universities in that, and whether there is enough funding. Well, I partly answered the one with the funds because it's often underestimated for companies in the health sector to provide this evidence and to run these studies. So the costs are often underestimated, right? We're talking about a 6-digit sum, euro sum, not Danish krona sum, right? So of a few €100,000 minimum. So that's a major capital invest. Now, are universities involved in that? I think sometimes, but pretty rarely. And there could be different reasons for that. But my impression is that most of these studies are run maybe partly with universities' research partners, but also partly on their own. Because these startups, they're just under huge time pressure, right? They just need to get it done. They don't have time to apply for grant programs and go through several rounds of revisions until they finally get funding for that. They just need to get stuff done.
Yeah, 100% agree. So I would imagine many of them are working with, CROs or clinical research organizations. But I was unaware that it had been enabled that you could have an application on the market for the first year, and you could use that year to collect the data that you need to show your proof of concept.
That's the German fast track model. Yeah,
that's brilliant. I mean, is that elsewhere too? I don't think we have that here, at least not to my knowledge. Maybe I'm a little outdated on some new regulations.
Yeah, to my knowledge, no, such a fast track does not exist in Denmark. I would have to look at the French and the Belgian model, who kind of followed a bit the German example. They might have similar provisions. Well, to my knowledge, in Denmark, there has been for many years already a center where they tested mental health solutions, telehealth solutions with a focus on psychiatry by that center. So that has been publicly funded. So in the way they have governed it in a stronger way, where they say, okay, because the health system is public, we test those apps and we provide the teleconsultation to our patients. And if we find out that these apps work, then we make it part of our health system and we integrate it, right? So in other words, because the health system is publicly funded and publicly provided in Denmark, they also check those apps, the new innovations, and if they pass the test, So they will do the testing basically themselves. They don't push it on the providers to provide the evidence. They test them themselves, and if they feel okay, this works, then they integrate it in the health system. So in a way, it's a more lean and more effective way, the way it's handled in Denmark.
It's still somewhat centralized, though, right? Like, who decides what gets to the front of the line?
Much more centralized, yeah.
Yeah, and how do they decide like where to prioritize their efforts? What apps? I could imagine there's a lot of other things that are happening. We are just human after all. So, but I know that maybe you have a bit of a soft spot, and you share some of the pain that individuals that are embarking on developing digital products. You've also worked on your own digital product. It's not a digital health product per definition, but it's definitely within the digital realm. And that is a product that is for collecting survey information, but it's much more specific for researchers. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you're referring to self-survey.
Yes.
So now we're changing realm a little bit, leaving the digital.
We are.
Or leaving the health, but keeping the digital. Yes. So, well, I'm not sure if researchers are always good founders, but some time ago I decided, okay, I need to do something else beside academia to have some impact and to create the reach that we have as researchers. So together with some students, I came up with the idea of self-survey, which is an open platform where researchers can run and host surveys. So when they want to do survey research. And the big difference to conventional survey platforms is that participants of that survey, after completing the survey, will get a meaningful and scientifically grounded recommendation, a feedback on their responses. So individually customized feedback, so to say. So why did I do that?
How does that work? So we have like, why did you do that? Because I know what it means to build something, and it's a lot of work and a lot of stuff that people don't see. But how does that work when you say customized feedback? Do you have like a demo example that you're used to explaining that you could walk me through?
Yeah, it's not a rocket science, but let me start first with why would I do that? And then get to the how, maybe. So why would I do that? Well, as a social science researcher, a lot of my research uses survey methods, right? And as somebody in business informatics or information systems, we often survey managers or leaders of certain types of teams or IT project managers or whoever about certain managerial issues. So we have actually quite knowledgeable expert, not interviewees, but survey participants. So we use their time, their valuable time, and we hardly give them anything in return. And I personally, as a PhD student, I felt pretty bad about using people's time to donate data for my research and share the experience with me via structured survey questionnaires. And without giving them anything in return. Well, I could give them in return like an Amazon voucher or whatever, but that's meaningless to people who have well-paid jobs. So I thought, okay, we need to give them in return something that our research would suggest in their particular situation. And now let's get to the how it works. So many of the survey, the cross-sectional survey research methods that we use in the back end, they use something called structural equation models. So those are models where you have different factors that impact each other, sort of a nomological network of variables where A impacts B and B impacts C, for example. And each of these factors is modeled with a set of survey items. So like we have 3 to 5 different related questions, right? And in this nomological network, the A affects B and the B affects C. There's a lot of theory and knowledge of domain knowledge of the researcher incorporated, right? So from prior research, we might know that it's A affecting B and not B affecting A, right? And so if a practitioner is interested in how their level of B can be viewed against their level of A, the research might help. So let me give you one example. So we studied, for example, maturity in maturity in IT service management. Right. Usually, when you run an IT unit in a company, you're interested in improving the maturity of your processes, making things more repetitive, improving quality, improving customer service. And you might have certain parameters, for example, the size of your organization, the number of services that you provide, etc. So you want to do some sort of benchmarking, but unlike regular benchmarking websites, which would just show you, the average maturity that you have to have is 3.5, and you have 3, so you need to improve. Maybe given that from research we know that the service levels, the service maturity is affected by the size and the number of services. We could say, well, given the small size of the organization and the low number of services that you provide, actually a level 2.5 is fine. Right, and suddenly the benchmark goes down, and you get a much more context-specific and much more, individually customized feedback from that survey. So, if this was all very cryptic, listeners could just go to selfsurvey.org and check out our IT service management survey, where you'll be asked questions like this, right? How big is your organization? How many services do you provide, et cetera, and what's your current level of maturity? And then you will get a individualized feedback about what not only your current level is, but also what the sort of benchmark level based on other organizations should be. And last sentence, our model is not, artificial intelligence or big data. It's actually small data. We're using the domain knowledge of the researchers, and, models can provide meaningful responses based just on a, let's say, low number, 50 or 100 responses, training data, depending how complex your model they are.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you have built-in logic, right? And that is actually what a lot of AI models miss. So it makes sense that you can, and you also have much more control. You understand how the answer is being generated. And this application is like free for users, or is there like a service fee that, in order to keep things operational? I mean, things, this probably costs some money to keep alive.
Yeah, right now I'm considering this part of my, academic citizenship, and we operate this out of my chair at University of Hagen. Prospectively, if this was to grow and reach a certain point, we might find different models. But right now, it's in a beta stage. It's available. Everybody can register and try it out. And it's a little bit of a hen and egg problem when you scale a platform like this. So, do you want more users, or do you first want more providers of surveys? And I'm particularly looking forward to the latter. So, if your listeners happen to be researchers who might engage in survey research that has a particular value to practitioners, they might want to consider using that platform to, either collect data or provide their research model as a feedback mechanism to practice, and then we could talk.
And it's all areas, right? It could be any sort of position. It's not only related to the one that you mentioned here. Is that correct?
Yes, it's domain independent or domain agnostic. It could work for any type of area. As I mentioned, it's particularly suitable for research that uses the structural equation model logics and PLS and kind of models. But those you find in all kinds of domains, not only in my domain, which happens to be information systems. It could be in marketing, it could be in management, it could also be in the health sciences or in any other areas.
So I find that the fact that you've kept it available for free, and that you're running it as part of your position at the university. I know you started a long time ago, so this is something that has come from you as an individual that you have built.
And many collaborators I have to mention here.
Of course, your collaborators
I had a few students and
people you talk
research
to,
assistants
yes,
helping out with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you have been the main driver. We could probably agree on that. And I think that this highlights like a really interesting merit of the scientific community, that a lot of the times that we like to build things, we like to see them work. We often don't want to see like monetary issues come into play unless it's absolutely necessary. And I think this is, as you know, I recently started working with a company called Noble Blocks, and they're tackling some of these internal frictions that I would say researchers have, or just persons in the scientific community about where should we receive monetary rewards or funding for the work that we would typically do for free. So I just want to highlight that this is a merit that it's I hope to see more of it. Obviously, I hope that it doesn't get drowned out by bigger players that are sort of corrupting the market and sort of taking away the opportunity to really show and have those merits shine. But before we get into like the publication and publish or perish and all these really interesting topics, how has your experience been with with building the technology? Have you felt that when you had this sort of side project that it was accepted by your peers? I came from an area where for many years, I didn't know that what my peers really thought about me working on a solution that could potentially be commercialized. I struggled with that. And then I started to talk to other scientists. And this was one of the reasons why I think I joined your webinar a while back, was to talk about that internal conflict. Have you experienced that? And what is your impression?
I think my impression is rather neutral to positive. Of course, the academic system is not necessarily made to create entrepreneurs or to, incentivize people to go out there and start some companies. It might be different in the engineering areas where you might see that more often. It might be a little bit different in computer science. I'm an information systems guy, so I'm one foot in the management area, where it's not often that that applied or that practical. I think it also depends a bit from school to school or from academic environment to environment, depending where you are. So back at the Copenhagen Business School, for example, we had a head of department who actually, provided an environment where it was viewed positively if you had an initiative to, start your own little thing. There's also CSE, Copenhagen School of Entrepreneurship, which is the university affiliated incubator and accelerator. So there are provisions. There's an environment for that. If I look at my current university, University of Hagen, I think we're a little bit, behind that process or in a different stage. There's less mature infrastructures or environment of stimulating that. So it's an open truth that the academic system is made to create knowledge and push out publications and teach on the side and educate students, and it's not its primary purpose to drive innovation. So much of the innovation we saw, it's maybe not directly from universities.
Yeah, but I also it's my opinion that I feel like we are, some of the problems that we're facing in our world today are becoming so large. And while I believe that we should have the opportunity to tinker away in the lab and decide which research questions we should follow, because that creative process, the whole foundation of that creative process is supposed to lead to things that we didn't know that we needed. So, the accidental discovery that, leads to the next big innovation. I think that's, something we would all like to hold on to. But if we just go back to saying, okay, well, not all academics should be producing knowledge for the sake of driving innovation. I agree with that. But at some point, I also see that there's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of research coming out. It's not being utilized. And if it's not being utilized, one has to question, why are we making it? So it's, then we're just it's just a means to no end. And is it because that researchers are not formulating it right, or they're not putting it in the right perspective, or that we need to, alter the way that we are pushing out the information in a research article? Is it the format of delivery that needs to change? Or do we need to put a little bit more accountability for where the funds are being used? I think the second one is probably always going to be true, but where do you see the biggest challenge for scientists today in terms of making sure that the knowledge that they produce, maintains its relevance? Because when it becomes irrelevant, then you're just going to trace it back and say, okay, let's just cut that part.
Yeah, good question. Not sure if I have a strong political opinion on that, but I think we have to differentiate a little bit basic research and what's often being called applied research. And it's probably not that black and white. It's rather a spectrum of different degrees to what extent your research is like more basic or more applied. So I guess there's many folks out there, in the natural sciences, in other areas, also in the behavioral sciences, who would say, look, what we create here is basic, fundamental knowledge, very principled things that do not go directly into innovations, into things that create an impact in society. It's a more, not an immediate contact, but more of a mediated effect that these innovations can have further down the line, 5-10 years in time. On the other end of the spectrum, there's applied research. Probably engineering is part of that. I think much of the research in my field, information systems, could also be considered applied research. I think the area you were in or are still in is also relatively applied. So if you consider yourself as a more applied researcher, at Journey we have also universities of applied sciences, many more than sole universities. If you're in that playing field, then of course you want your research to be discovered by practice and picked up and end up in certain innovations or improvements of things in the field. And I think you're right. You're right in pointing out that this is not necessarily always the case. You could look at citation numbers, then you see that, well, it's a big skewed distribution. Few articles are cited a lot and picked up elsewhere other researchers. Many articles are hardly ever cited, also depending where you publish and how you publish, and we might get to that later. But of course, citation is not a good measure for impact to practice. I think the first point is we actually lack a measure of impact to practice. You might at some point want to invite my former colleague Niels Bjørn Andersen from Copenhagen Business School, who has some interesting thoughts on how to measure impact to practice. But getting back to the applied researcher, I think taxpayers who have a right to know how their tax money is used to, for that applied research, and if much of it does not end up where it's supposed to end up, I think we can always increase the effectiveness and the share of the research that is actually being picked up. And it's a two-sided problem. I think on the one hand side, researchers could do more if they had more bandwidth and more time. They could do more to translate their research into practical impacts and explain their audience what they are doing. They also need to invest time actually to find their audience. We could speak a lot about what relevance means, right? Relevance is not a black and white thing. Either something is relevant or not. It's research is always relevant to somebody. So you have to find this somebody and go to them and explain it to them. And whenever I make the effort and try to find my target audiences, for example, now we do a lot of research about personal health records. So I talk to insurance companies about our research and they find it highly enlightening, right? They're like, oh, wow, you found out all this stuff. Well, I never had the time or had thought about digging in these scientific databases and pull out your publication that exactly says this and that, right? So we researchers need to do something to bridge the gap, but I think there's also a need, and that's why I like your podcast and your initiative so much. I think there's also a need from the practitioner side to find ways in how we can better access academic knowledge and maybe invite in researchers and translate research articles which are not necessarily very digestible, translate them into research communication.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned when I was working on Navigate Pain, which was, the digital health app that sort of led to, our conversation. And actually, I think that's probably what initiated our friendship. I didn't really understand how hard it was to bring something to market, or how hard it was to get the adoption, and I didn't understand all the regulatory aspects that came with bringing a product to market. And I think a lot of researchers, when they're in a field, they miss that part. I'm not saying for digital health apps. I mean, it could be extrapolated to any field, but we do get to in a sort of a zone where we are just bouncing these theoretical questions off of each other, and while we can marvel at what the outcomes might be, I felt, even for me, there was no initial accountability for some of the research projects that I spent my time on. Like, what is this really, like, who is this really going to help? And not just like, it's not a nice thing to have. It should be, you should be willing to put like a large sum of your own money or behind it. I'm not saying that, asking researchers to pay for their own research, but if they were asked, they should be so certain that this project needs to run. Like, it should be so ingrained in their gut. Because I think we would have a lot of better research, and maybe that research would have more impact. And I know that there are other factors at play here. There's a lot of pressure to publish. There's a lot of competition to get grants. And I think, with the grants, there's a huge promises made in the grants. But I'm not sure like how often individual researchers are held accountable for actually achieving, the promises made in grants. So that would be, I would love it if someone did a study on that, like could find like all the promises that were outlined in a grant, and to track, did these research teams actually, follow through on their promises, even remotely. Like even 50%, I think would be, a satisfactory outcome. So so I do feel that there needs to be more accountability, and how to get that accountability to come round. I mean, we can't just ask people to change because, we're sitting in a podcast and saying, hey, this needs to change. How do we get people in the the whole line of stakeholders? How do we get them to change and say, like, it's not about the citation score? I would love to interview your colleague about the metric, the new way to, what did you call it? Research to impact?
Well, I called it impact to society. Niels Bjørn Andersen is talking about value. He called it the value index. But I think value is maybe not the right term, so we have to start with the terminology, how to frame that index. Yeah,
like a true academic.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start with the definitions first. How do we define impact? Well, a few things about the first thing that you mentioned, that academics would underestimate the effort that it actually takes to bring a product to market. I think in a way I can comfort you from what I know from startups founded by non-academics. It's the same. So I think all we know from entrepreneurship research and also from talking to people who work in incubators and accelerators, it's always the same thing, right? People, founders are underestimated. And probably that's a good coping mechanism to underestimate it, because if you really knew what effort it was, you wouldn't even start it, right? If you knew how much time it would kill you, how much of your own money you would need to put into this, you would keep your corporate job and never ever start the thing. That's at least what all the founders tell me, and I think I can get a sense of that with my own project. Right. So that's it about underestimating the effort. About the accountability for research proposals and research projects. I'm not sure if. So I have two hearts beating in my chest. One is the researcher who wants the academic freedom and academic independence, right? And that's granted in the German constitution, by the way, more than it's granted in Denmark, the freedom of research. So of course you should commit to the goals and achieve the goals that you aim to achieve. But you also know that research is not always a linear process. So sometimes you target the goal, but on the way you find out that something changes, something comes across, and you need to turn right instead of turning left or going straight, and then you arrive at completely different conclusions or outcome than what you originally aimed for. So I'm a little bit skeptic about this increasing the accountability, while at the same time, my other heart is the taxpayer heart. At the same time, I can sympathize with the fact that we should have accountability for what happens with public research money.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the taxpayers, like society at large. And it's it's our kids and their kids, and how well our economy will run in the future. So yeah, I'm not saying that all research isn't done well. I would just like to see more accountability for funds that are being utilized by research teams. In my experience, there's very little accountability that I've seen or heard others talk about. So I'd love it if someone heard this and said, "Hey, Shelley, check this out because this is what's happening over here."
Do you see a fly here?
I can, yeah, I can. It's a panel discussion.
Should I remove that? Can you also hear it? I really will screw up the whole recording, right?
No, it was absolutely hilarious, and I think we're not going to cut this out. We're going to keep the fly in the podcast.
Okay, let's keep the fly. Okay, I'll shut up, and you shut up too.
No, it's fine. Yeah, well, what is so academic publishing is one thing. It's a whole world in itself. We have grants, then we do the research, we make the publication because that is sort of evidence of where that money has gone, and then we get to the review process. So what has been your experience as both an author but also as a reviewer? Because I've been on both. I also saw that you held some editorial positions, so you've also had that experience as well. So let's just start with author. How is your experience going through traditional review processes, on a scale from 0 to 10, where 10 is the worst pain imaginable, and 0 is no pain? So how is the review process for you?
Well, I think the higher the journal you target, the more painful the review process is, and it's part of the game that we created for ourselves. So you need to know how much pain you can accept, but also how high you can sell your research. But I think generally this look at journal quality is a good thing, because I'm a big believer that we need to value quality more than quantity. I mean, we're all aware of these problems with predatory publishing, right? And all these fake journals coming out just for authors to place fake articles to improve their indices. So whatever index you create, right? Some people will optimize their activities towards that. So I'm a big believer in quality, and that's why I'm also a believer in the peer review process. I think generally it works. It is, of course, there's of course some challenges. One challenge is that we need to, constantly educate new reviewers. So I'm a department editor at BISA Journal, the journal I mentioned earlier. BISA is structured with different departments. We have associate editors, and we need to not only recruit those and tell them, this is the work you do, and they recruit their reviewers, but we also need to teach and be vocal about what makes reviewing a mutually available process. And now there's generative AI, so we need to be explicit about what are the boundaries of employing that sort of technology in the academic review. The other is the scarcity of reviewers, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Yeah. With more and more papers being submitted, publishing becomes more important for tenure decisions, for career decisions. Even young scholars start publishing probably earlier. So the bar is constantly sort of increasing. We have more influx in most academic journals. And at the same time, reviewers will say, well, I have less and less time for that. So we have a big scarcity of reviewers, of recruiting people. That's an issue. And I think in the midterm, we have to find ways on how to incentivize reviewing, but also keeping the processes slim. So some of the things we do, for example, I do as an editor, I do very strict gatekeeping. So if there's not any potential in a paper, I will not give it out for review. I will not pass it on to an associate editor. Associate editors do the same with even more strict sense, right? And then at later stages, when papers are already developed, we try to avoid going over a third round, fourth round in favor of, bringing the paper to market and just with editorial feedback, bringing it on the road. These are kind of the things to make the processes a bit more streamlined. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that approach. I like the approach also with like not dragging out the peer review unnecessarily, knowing that research is always a work in motion. Of course, if there are glaring errors, they need to be addressed. But sometimes, like if you have people that are picking on, maybe the language or they don't like the color of the graphs, whatever, like those things can be, put aside. So yeah, that's a good strategy. Yeah, not to drag it out. And then I guess the next question I would have for you is, if you're the gatekeeper, how is it that how do you trust in your own opinion to say pass, no pass?
I think it's a little bit like wine tasting, right? So when I started with alcohol at young age, no,
That's good.
let me
Keep it
frame this
going.
differently. But over time you develop a certain sense for, or at least you believe to develop a certain sense for, what is good quality and what is maybe not sufficient quality, and you learn which wine works for which sort of dish, or which paper works for what sort of journal and at what level um, it's being published. But then there's also the collective intelligence element. I mean, if you have 3 reviewers for a paper plus an associate editor plus a department editor or a senior editor, there's up to 5 people looking at the paper and giving their opinion. And so then if it comes through, you have a pretty good sense of equality or not.
I mean, it's a really it's a legitimate answer that you gave in the sense that it's years of experience that you are relying on when you scan a document. So what's the initial impression? There are certain things that I know that so as an editor, I could scan through something and I could see very quickly the level of attention that was given to the manuscript. I think that was one of my first telltale signs. And then of course, then you would dive deeper if you felt the need to do so. I think that was like what I rested on, and maybe it's like you said, it's just over the course of many years, you get this gut feeling, which is not really a gut feeling; it's a collective experience that you are sort of synthesizing in a split moment. And we make a lot of split moment assessments all the time. When we meet people, we make quick assessments of whether or not we like them, and this is not just because we're over years and years and years of experience of meeting people, you tend to develop a certain skill. So I do understand that you have to be quick, but it also highlights a huge problem because the number of articles is not plateauing. Like it's just going to continue to increase. Should we continue on this trajectory of the citation game, or you need the publication for promotion, and as we keep racing all of us together, then instead of having to do 4 or 5 publications to move up the ladder, then you have to do 10 because 10 is now the new bar. So we really start to encourage some bad behavior, and we've seen bad behavior. There's like more and more articles being retracted now. You talked about AI and the plagiarism there. I do see AI and as a tool that can unlock potential, can improve your productivity. So I'm not against using AI as a collaborative tool, not at all. My biggest worry is about the fabrication of data. I think that is probably really, really hard to screen against, more so than, I worry less about that, like less about AI writing a few sentences and then you editing them, and worry more about the fabrication of data. Have you guys had discussions on your editorial board about how do you verify data? Or
Yeah, it is being discussed, and as a matter of fact, my journal, Visa Journal, is the first in our field that introduced what's called the pre-registered report. That's something I think we took over from other disciplines like the medical field. So I'm sure we did not invent that. So that's one mechanism that a journal can implement to provide against, what you said, fabricated data or hypothesizing after the research results are known, the famous harking. So the idea in pre-registered reports is that authors would submit their research design, maybe with some pre-test demo data, prior to the actual submission of the research. And that works particularly well for experimental studies, also for survey studies. It does, of course, not work for designs where the researchers do not control all of the conditions. So for case studies, for example, it probably does not work. But it will work for experimental studies and survey studies. And then the editorial team will look at it and say, look, okay, this research design will work and or not. And if it does work, if they get a positive response, they can later submit their manuscript where they execute exactly that research which they described in the pre-registered report. And then it will also be fine if hypotheses are not being supported or confirmed, right? Then it will also be fine if the results do not come out as expected because, the committee, committed to that design. So that's one of the things that journals can do. Of course, that doesn't solve the whole problem, but I think the general tendency, answering your question, is that with this increased threat for fabricated data, fabricated or plagiarized results, journals probably should and probably also will increase the requirements for what is being submitted and what has to be shown. For example, you already see this, that you can voluntarily upload your data and your scripts. For example, if you have statistics, your R scripts or your Stata scripts along with the data to show exactly the procedures that you have executed beyond what's written in the paper. So to show all details and well-versed reviewers will look at that. And in the long run, this might become more of a standard at the top journals in each of the fields.
Yeah. Because the next question would be like, if you have a very good reviewer, they'll take the time to go in and like review the data. And sometimes you can tell if data looks too perfect. And then, I mean,
with experience, yeah,
with experience,
or like
you can spot
junior
it.
researchers cannot. It's the wine tasting again.
But getting like those reviewers, I mean, do you see that as being a challenge in the future? Like not just for your journal, but for other journals?
It's a big challenge, and it's getting harder and harder. And in my field, it is a discussion at the conferences. There will always be a panel about reviewing and journal work and why it's important and how we deal with these issues that people are less willing or to spend a lot of time for that. I see two possible solutions. I think we need to discuss more sincerely about what some fields, like for example, finance, the field of finance, which is a subfield of management, has done, right? There are some journals where reviewers are being incentivized with a certain pay, let's say $150 or whatever, if you turn around the review of a certain length and quality within a time frame of, 6 weeks maybe, right? $150 is not a lot for the work that you actually do, but at least it's some sort of recognition, and you get that probably on top of your, university salary. So it's at least a good sign of recognition. And there's some pros, but also many voices against such mechanisms, because of course you can easily see the danger that it leads to more commercialization of review activities, and we all consider this ethically as part of our academic duties and our citizenship to do this review work. So there are pros and cons. I tend towards the more pro side, at least as an idea. I think we need to discuss that. Another, maybe even more important lever is recognizing the service that people do more explicitly in the promotion schemes, right? I mean, if we are less romantic about the whole publishing game, right? If we're romantic about it, we would say that, it's all for the sake of knowledge and generating more knowledge. That's why we publish. But at the end of the day, we also know it has a lot to do with promotion and career progression. So we also need to publish to make that next step, be it tenure or be it, full professorship or whatever in academic careers. So it's just part of the game which we created. And but universities can change that game, and they can say, look, we can weigh impact to society bigger in promotion decisions. We can also weigh service to the community, like reviewing activities, like editorial activities. We can weigh that bigger in promotion decisions than we did in the past. So if we change the incentive scheme at that end, it might also in the mid-run, address the scarcity of reviewers and of service roles that we're experiencing right now. And it's partly being done. And again, I don't want to come across here as the big pessimist or the one who's bashing the current system. I think in part these things are happening already. So for example, when I got my position as a professor in Germany, I don't think it was necessarily only because of my, great number and quality of publications, which, others have too. It's been for also for other factors, I suppose. Softer factors. Some might have to do with teaching, with didactic experience, with maybe leadership roles, et cetera, and also with service roles that you take within a university or in the wider academic community. To give you another example, we saw a position that's recently been filled in the US, right, with a colleague who maybe has not been the most prolific for their publications, but maybe for other things like industry impact, like impact to society, like policy work that this person has been doing, right? So I think gradually we see these things changing already. That it's actually not this one way that you have to publish or otherwise you perish, as we used to preach in the past. I think we're seeing a greater differentiation, that there's different types of professorships, there's different career trajectories that you actually can take. Of course, it could be more diversified, right? We could have the innovation and entrepreneurship professor who's founding one startup after the other. Or we have those colleagues actually, and it could be the highly ivory tower research professor at the other side. So I think we'll see more of that differentiation in the future, I guess.
Yeah, we can certainly hope so, that the reasons for promotions become more broad, that you take into the softer sides of what nurtures scientific progress. So that could also be like lobbying for changes in legislation, partaking in big conferences and the work that it is to help others that are around you succeed. I mean, and again, doing the peer review because it's part of a service to the community. I also have, and share your opinion, like I don't really see it as a negative thing to reward reviewers for working, because we have to remember that this is a global market, like peer review. Not everybody earns the same level of salary working at a university. Some people are, on short-term contracts, postdocs, however. So I don't see it as a horrible thing that they can get at this token amount for their time. I do, however, wonder what your opinion is about the emergence of someone that would be known as a professional peer reviewer. So someone who it's their job to really, dive deep into the market, or not to the market, but into the field or a niche, and really stay on top. And that is like their primary job. So they're not an actively publishing scientist. Maybe they have a scientific background, and then their job is to perform the rigor that is required. What is your opinion on a position like that?
It's an interesting thought. I think it's the first time I hear that sort of idea spontaneously. So I think these people do a great service, but I'm not necessarily sure that we should institutionalize that and create a role around that and pay them a salary for doing just review work. So in that sense, I'm a bit more fond of the model of researching and reviewing. No, I think it should be a balance, right? I mean, it's pretty mathematical. For one paper that you submit, you will get 3 reviews in the first round, maybe another 2 in the second, and then put the editorial reviews on top. So you get some 5 to 10 reviews on top. So basically, for each paper that you submit, you yourself should provide 10 reviews somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have people that are publishing a lot, and they would argue that they're busy, and rightfully so. If you are publishing a lot, then you're probably very busy. So yeah, I do think that there is a balance that needs to be struck. But I was curious to hear what you thought about, this emergence of a professional peer review. But I also know that you have PhD students that are working in different fields. So this sort of multiplies your challenge. And I would guess, my educated guess, of course, would be, because I've been in academia for a long time, is that you're not an isolated example of having multiple PhD students working in different directions. So how is it, how much time do you get to stay just on top of the field? So, and the reason I bring that up is because we expect reviewers to be on top of their field all the time. And, we already know it takes a long time for people to complete a review, and the time that they would have to actually take in order to be on top of the literature in order to make the review, and the number of articles that are coming out. Like in a year, 2020, we hit like almost 3 million. I don't know what the latest, what 24 has brought, but I'm guessing this is not a linear issue.
Yeah.
It's like exponential.
Okay. Right. So you're talking about the explosion of information and the information overflow that we experience. Yeah.
How can we be humanly, how is it humanly possible to perform the rigorous peer review when...
to perform rigorous research when you hardly have chances to keep up with the developments, right? And we do some research in generative AI, right? Artificial intelligence, and the progress is so fast, right? I mean, you need to keep up, and it's pretty hard just to keep up with what's being published. So yeah, that's an issue. And to answer your first question, do I have enough time to keep up with reading up on the different fields that I'm active in? No. But luckily, I have the privilege to work with a handful of PhD students, and each of them has their specific foci, and I expect them to be as up to date as possible in their respective areas, and which they manage and which they do. I'd like to challenge a bit the argument that you specifically need to be always on top of the literature when it comes to reviewing. I don't think that's necessarily the case. So to be a good reviewer, you don't need to have the knowledge of all the literature. It's not your task to tell the authors, what they should read up on or which paper they forgot to cite or to include in their work. That's maybe a bit naive, image of the reviewer. I think the reviewer has to check the thoroughness and whether it's understandable, and whether the authors do a good job in explaining their readers the type of work that they used. And when I review a work and I have some problem with some references, I can still go back case by case and see who they cited and what these authors said, and if they misappropriated those messages or not. So I can sort of do sampling, but I don't necessarily need to be an expert in the field in which I'm reviewing, right? So that's often a misconception, that reviewers will say, "Oh, I'm not an expert in this and that field, I cannot accept this review." No, you can, because you are exactly the average reader in our field who might read this paper, and you don't have to be a domain expert in order to assess the paper and the quality of writing and the understandability and the thoroughness and the method and so on and so forth.
I think you were challenging my argument on the expertise required to perform the peer review, and I would also come back to say, okay, so if we open that part up, then now we're saying, well, we can bring people from industry, to review papers. You don't necessarily need to be an academic.
Well, maybe not only, but some of the journals, we have some journals in our field, like MS Quarterly Executive, which, as the name implies, focuses on executives or MBA students and so on. And in that journal, sometimes they will add an industry practitioner or people who work close to industry to the review panel. So why not? If the goal is
makes it could open up a new people to ask. But what about, so if we go with the argument, or just the scenario that you don't have to be an expert necessarily to make the review, because you look at the soundness and, the thoroughness and, that everything lines up pretty much in the paper. How then do you evaluate if the paper is incremental enough to be published? Because
incremental number.
Because
Incremental in the top journal
incremental is what we see.
It's usually a negatively connotated word. If you make an incremental contribution, it says, well, this is not good enough. They want a
significant,
major contribution. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I suppose it just sort of opens up that question, and I'm not purposely trying to be combative, but I do see that, how do we decide that now? Like what's beyond incremental, and do we need, you need to know what's out there in order to know that if it is a significant gain in a certain direction for a particular field.
Well, or if reviewers tell you you're not making a major contribution, then maybe the authors just didn't do a good job in explaining their contribution. So turning this question upside down, it means, look, authors out there, please don't forget to argue why your contribution is major,
yes,
and not incremental.
Yeah.
In the paper, don't forget to line out the theoretical contribution and the practical contribution.
In the conclusions, you can write, this is a major contribution.
What it is. Push them to it. Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't tell the reader, then how will they know?
No, yeah. So we really have to spell it out for them. So I agree. So it does come down to communication in many cases.
And if you're not able to communicate it, then there's probably none.
That could also be the case. Yes. Considering your PhD students today, and the challenges that they have moving forward, because we know that doing a PhD is not a walk in the park. I'm sure you can look back and to your own years as a PhD student.
Oh yeah, especially the beginnings are hard, right?
Yeah. Do you see that they have the same struggles that you have? I mean, you now you have a chance to reflect on it. You have different pair of lenses on. You've gone through systems that have changed. We've gone from science, doing science because you love science, to making sure you get your first paper out before this date so that you can qualify for a postdoc here and here and here. How do you see the struggle today of the PhD student? Is it the same from what you had?
I think in a way it's the same. Although as professors, we are, at least as grown-ups and aging people, we tend to forget how it was like when we were, students, and when we were in the positions of the people that we now have the pleasure to coordinate and work with. But if you make the effort and put yourself into that position that you were in, like how many years ago, like 15 years ago, maybe, then I think in general it is similar, right? Of course, for each and everyone it feels a bit different, but yeah, at the beginning, like, it's a new system, new norms. It's a specific genre, writing these academic papers, right? If you've never done that before, it's something very new, and it's a very steep learning curve, as people in management used to say, right? But the good news is that you actually can learn it, right? So listen up, early PhD students out there, right? Don't despair. Things can evolve. Everybody's capable to learn, and even though the first steps are always hard, you develop a certain routine. You develop a routine in writing your first paper. You develop a routine in reviewing papers. We all get better with things when we do them more often. So
don't give up is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't give up.
Don't give up. I think if you ask me for what has changed, I think it's actually a positive development, that the fact that the bar is always increasing slightly, right? So the people who got tenure one generation before me at Copenhagen Business School, I think they had lower tenure requirements than I had. The people who are now getting tenure after me, they have already higher tenure requirements, just because as a field, and I hope that's the case for all fields out there, but as in our field, information systems, I think knowledge is being passed on, and younger generations learn from older generations, and that leads to, I think, an overall increase, like a gradual, not a exponential, but a gradual increase of quality and also quantity over time. But again, I don't want to frighten anyone here. I think on a positive note, in our field, I mean, the digitalization wave is not over. There's there's a lot of demands on teaching young students. It's a growing market. We need those young folks, right? There's a place for everybody somewhere in academia or at the verge of academia and practice. So there's no need to think, oh my God, the bar is increasing, I will never get into that system, right? It's maybe a bit tougher in the US at some also some highly prolific schools in Asia, but I feel in Europe we're still okay in that whole publish and perish game.
Yeah. Okay. So the notion is that the bar is increasing for what is needed to get to the next level in the academic ladder.
Because the quality is increasing, because the field is
because things are progressing,
becoming better, in terms of methods, in terms of rigor, in terms of theory, in all areas.
Yeah, one could argue that what is required to run a study today would have taken a lot more time to run half that version of a study 20 years ago.
Yes, my first hit, as you used to say, at the International Conference on Information Systems, which is thought of as the flagship conference in our field, was based on only 6 interviews. Don't tell anybody. It was 2011. I got in with a paper with only 6 interviews. Right? It was 4 cases, but 6 interviews. I think that would not be feasible now in 2024.
But this also raises a really critical question, because some things are easier, but the study requirements nowadays for some of the PhDs. I mean, I looked at some of the protocols that my colleagues' PhD students were having, and I was like, maybe I'm not tough enough, because I thought there's 3 PhDs in one PhD project, in the sense that each protocol could have been a PhD in its own right, because they were so extensive. Again, that's just my impression. I saw that there's a.
And what do you mean with protocols? Do you mean the research proposal?
Yeah, so three different studies that have cohesion, but are so large in their own running, it could constitute a PhD. So when you're running a study with 40 participants who come to the lab 6 times over a period of 4 months, you're just thinking, okay, all the scheduling, it's real people, that's gonna run, coordination. We only have one piece of equipment that can be used for this particular study. So I see that the expectations, I think, are accelerating faster than the means. So while I can agree that nowadays you probably would have had to have done at least 22 to 24 interviews for your first study, when you look at some of the clinically oriented study or the experimental studies, the N number, number of participants, needs to be a lot higher. And when you start to increase that number, you have the administration and the practicalities of having a larger scale study start to take hold.
But on the other hand side, you could also think about it in terms of the means that we have in place to do research nowadays. So if you think 30, 40 years ago, there was no online libraries where you could type in keywords and get all the papers out. There was no, what's this AI called that is doing literature reviews for you? I forgot. All right, there was no tools that could generate summaries of whole bodies of knowledge for you. You had to go literally to the library, to the copy machine, and copy the papers, and you had to make reference lists yourselves. Right now you have reference managers. You can download PDFs. You can search through them automatically. So I mean, I'm not trying to give the impression that everything's easy, but also then on the data acquisition side, right? When I was a PhD student, I had to seal envelopes and send the questionnaires by mail. Nowadays, you post a survey on Prolific or any other of these online research data acquisition platforms. You pay a few bucks for your research money, and you get hundreds of responses just on a mouse click. So many things have also become easier. So in the light of that, it's also understandable that some requirements are getting higher.
Yeah, I agree. I think the examples you gave are perfect, but I would also argue that it somehow deflates their value. So it's like, well, we can get 100 respondents really fast, so now now you have to do 2 studies. It's not about the reflection on the data or the analysis or going through the process. It's about how much can you produce? So while I think we agree on many things, I also think that if we have developed tools to make our lives easier and faster, we certainly haven't pushed PhDs faster through the system. If anything, I would say it's even hard. It's getting harder to complete a PhD. How is your experience with talks with colleagues, not just where you are but around, about PhD burnout, people leaving after PhDs because they are just the talent drain, keeping people that you would like to have in academia, keeping them to stay? Is this part of this bigger problem of more? Because we have the means. You just said, we have the means. We can run studies a lot easier, certain studies a lot easier.
So where should I start? I mean, of course, that's an important issue in times where there's a general demand for highly qualified work as universities. We're also competing for the best minds. I guess 10, 20 years ago, when there was open positions, you had a lot of applicants, and department heads, professors, chair professors could choose from a range of candidates. I suppose nowadays at a institution like mine, it's not necessarily the case. So we're fighting for getting the best minds, and part of that is also creating a good workplace, creating good work conditions. And again, part of that is also, of course, preventing from what you mentioned, like burnout and setting requirements to a level that would, result in increased work stress. It's always a delicate balance. That's my experience, because everybody is different of, how much they can cope, how much also they want to achieve, how much they can achieve. So it's a bit hard to sort of make a universal solution for that. But it's definitely something we need to have an eye on as leaders in research, leaders in education, that we're not draining the potential that we have there, but instead nurture the resources, the capabilities, the people we have, and lead them onto a path where they can set their own goals and set their own levels. So it's definitely an issue. I talk about that with colleagues, how hard to set the bar and what to expect, and especially that we're a teaching-oriented university. We are the university with the highest number of students by enrollment in whole Germany. Most of our learners are distant learners. So what I'm trying to say is we have a high teaching volume, and that also translates into the work that our scientific staff is doing. And so these are things you have to take into account when you think about, A-star journals and where you want to publish and all that.
One of the questions I actually meant to ask you when we were talking about some of the digital health projects and applications that we're running, and I know I'm circling back to the very beginning of our conversation, but
not sure I remember that so long ago.
I was, we hear a lot of information about AI and hype, and it's the end of the world, and we're all going to lose our jobs. And as much as I would disagree, I see there was a point where data governance was really big in the media when GDPR came out. Do people need to be as concerned about a private or commercial entity supplying a digital health application because they will gain access to some of your health metrics? I mean, do you really see that concern is warranted to the degree that, for example, you see people talking about AI and the doom gloom rhetoric around that?
Interesting question and very topical. Why? Because Apple, not Google. This time it was Apple. Apple just made a agreement with Google to use their AI, which is now called Gemini, to use Gemini for advanced health data analytical processing. And so Apple, many people have an Apple Watch. Apple has sophisticated health solutions. We talked about the machine learning, and that Apple products proactively will prompt you if you might have some cardiac problem, right? And then you all concerned, you will run to your cardiologist. So we follow these stories, and now they will integrate AI into this health suite portfolio. Since Apple apparently has not been able to provide their own large language models or their own multimodal models, they are cooperating with Google and probably also OpenAI. And of course, the interesting question is, what does this mean to consumers? Well, first of all, Apple will prompt their users whether they consent to this data being shared with third parties. But if we know something from research, now comes the research communication part. We know that consumers do implicitly some sort of calculus, and they weigh the benefits against the concerns. So they think, oh, my data could go from my Apple Watch to Google Gemini and could be stored there and could be used for whatever reasons. But on the other hand, I will get access to these sophisticated functions, and I could just tell my Apple Watch, look, tell me what I need to do to improve my sleep patterns based on my data, and it will respond automatically like a personal health assistant. Wow, isn't that cool? And so the benefits are pretty high, and that's also what came out in our study, right? If the benefits are high, you will weigh the concerns lower and probably agree to using that. Now you were asking me, should consumers be concerned about that? Well, I think in parts, yes, at least they should think about what consequences this should have, right? But also as a public, we should be concerned about that, because instead of the health data ending up in siloed repositories at the big techs, we want to create what I talked about in the beginning, these public health data spaces where the data in anonymized and non-person related form can be used for research and can be used for training, for developing innovative solutions. So maybe as a public, we should also be concerned that data lands in the proprietary hands of some big tech company instead of, being used as a public good.
Yeah, absolutely. I also see that as, companies, like in this case, this merger on this particular project, will start to also attract people that want to work at the forefront of industry. So they will also take, people that would normally stay in academia, because if you want to work at the forefront, then you're going to go to where the data is. We see that happening now. And as the case that you outlined here, that's a very possible scenario for our health data. And then I think the other thing that you brought up, which is also, I think, important to highlight, is that as an individual, you may not think that your choice matters so much because it's just you. But collectively, when we all do it, and I don't know that you've done it and my neighbor's done it, and we've all, everyone on the block, we've all done it, but we've all taken the individual choice to do it. Then, you start to get this aggregation of information. And of course, I think a long time ago, people talked about, and then the health insurance companies, they get access to your data and then they deny you, help, which is really, quite the opposite reason why you signed up in the first place, right? It was to improve your health. What do you think in terms of like how much a health assistant can actually help you? Because, what is it that you think people generally lack today in knowledge? Like, we've been told to eat less, move more, rest, work less. So when you think about the health assistant, stay out of the sun.
Drink. Yeah, exactly. We're all going to the beach.
Yeah, with
sometimes without
sunscreen.
Yeah. That's what's famously known in research as the intention-behavior gap, right? Or maybe as the knowledge-intention gap, first of all.
What can we expect? Yeah, should we sign it up? Should we sign over? all our data. No, I know you don't have the answer, and I know you don't want to give advice to everybody about what they should do with their data, but...
Well, if I had the answer, I would be a very rich person already. Then I would have dropped the academic career and gone maybe for a startup venture that's implementing exactly that. Well, I can try to give an answer in parts from a sort of design and information systems design perspective. I think we need to design solutions that make it easy and that integrate well with our lives or in a work context with our workflows in order to achieve the desired ends. I mean, there's a lot of research about nudging, which is about, influencing giving additional information around certain life choices that we make without significantly changing the choice architecture. So whether I smoke or not is still an individual decision, but if I put a cancerous lung on the cigarette package, then it might stimulate some more healthy behaviors. And so in terms of information systems, we can also think about digital nudges, so making the solutions easier to use and integrate them more seamlessly into our health system. And right now, at least speaking for Germany, we're far away from that. So if you want to have a digital therapeutic DIGA prescribed, you get a code. You have to go to a doctor, then you get a prescription, and you send that to your insurance. Then you get a code on paper, and with that, you can download the app and enter the code. Right. So that's so many steps. It's such a unseamless workflow that makes it very difficult to use that solutions or to only get to use those solutions in the first end. And so I think making things easy, making things usable, integrate them in the lives of consumers, users, patients, but also in the lives of the professional care staff, the medical profession who need to deal with those solutions in their everyday lives. I think that will already be a great step to make things easier and then also to change behaviors.
So you're an advocate then, let's say, of digital health solutions of various degrees. So whether it's diagnosis, screening, nudging for healthier lifestyles, or just, getting your access to your medicine faster, let's say. So you're an advocate, generally speaking.
I have to be there. I think that's symptomatic for our field. We are mostly technology optimists, some of the technology pessimists. I think I tend to the former side, yes.
Yeah, but where is like your...
Somebody's got to be the optimist.
Yeah, but where is like what is the one thing that you're super excited about right now in this space? So what's the one area that, like, if you could drop all other obligations and say, I would love to spend my time on this particular topic, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it's actually generative artificial intelligence. And it's such a powerful technology. I mean, it's really different from the buses that we have, bus with double Z, not with the S, the buses that we've had in the past. It's really come to stay. It's such a powerful technology. The progress is so fast that it's really hard to keep up.
Is there anything that you think that I should have asked you and didn't, or were you hoping that I was going to ask you a particular question and I didn't cover it?
So great, folks. Just read the summary, then you get the whole gist of it. Seriously, this was fantastic. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. I think we covered a lot of interesting stuff. Discovered also some things on the way. So thanks for having me, and
great.
Hope to see you. Next time
will.
Soon.
You'll be back. I'll be inviting you for round 2. So. Okay.
Great.